Today I'm going to talk about the deception of the Federal Reserve Bank. Is the Federal Reserve Bank the root of all evil? So in 1 Timothy, it says, "But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But thou, O man of God, flee these things, and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness." So here we have a symbol, the symbol of the Federal Reserve Bank. It says United States on it, Federal Reserve System, which really is meant to deceive because it's actually a private bank. It does work close together with the government, but it is not a government entity. So there's the first thing that's deceitful about it. We see in slide number 2 that the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. He gave the 12 Federal Reserve banks the ability to print money in order to ensure economic stability. More specifically, the Federal Reserve System created the dual mandate to maximize employment and keep inflation low. So here we have a picture of, this is the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. That's the outside of it. As you can see, there's bars on the windows. And I got this information, this description from Investopedia, to show you that they tried to make it sound that it was like it was going to be good for America in order to keep and ensure the economic stability of the nation, but the stated purpose is deceitful. So here we have former Congressman Ron Paul. He was born on August 20th in 1935. He's an American author, Christian, physician, and former politician. And in 2009, he published a book called End the Fed, which stated his case for ending the Federal Reserve System. So I'll just read you this description from Amazon. "The Federal Reserve Bank is inflating currency today at nearly a Weimar or Zimbabwe level, a practice that threatens to put us in an inflationary depression where $100 bills are worthless. What most people don't realize is that the Fed, created by the Morgans and Rockefellers at a private club off the coast of Georgia, is actually working against their own personal interests." So Congressman Ron Paul has been talking about this pretty much his entire career. And then here's his book that can be found at Amazon. It's called End the Fed, if you want to check that out. And so this is from page 2 of his book, End the Fed. He says, "I disagree on each point," talking about what they say up here, that the Federal Reserve Bank was created to ensure economic stability. He says, "So I disagree on each point. After all is said and done, the Fed has one power and that is unique to it alone. It enables the creation of money out of thin air. Sometimes it makes vast new amounts, sometimes it makes lesser amounts. The money takes a variety of forms and enters the system in various ways. And the Fed does this through techniques such as open market operations, changing reserve ratios, and manipulating interest rates, operations that all result in money creation. Given that money is 1/2 of every commercial transaction and that whole civilizations literally rise and fall based on the quality of their money, we are talking about an awesome power, one that flies under cover of night. It is the power to weave illusions that appear real, as long as they last. That is the very core of the Fed's power." So I highlighted a few things here. The fact that it's deceitful and that it enables the creation of money out of thin air. And the rise, it is true that civilizations literally rise and fall based on the quality of their money, because if your money is worthless, then no one can buy anything and the economy collapses. And here's where he talks about it being deceitful. It says, "One that flies under cover of night and weaves illusions that appear real." So what he's saying is the Fed can manipulate the interest rate and manipulate the amount of currency available in the system to make it look like we're prosperous, but really an economy can be falling apart and just appear to be working and functioning properly. So back when this was being created, not all people were deceived, and I have this as proof. This is a political cartoon that was happening before the Federal Reserve Act got released, back when it was called the Aldrich Plan. And so it says the coming money trust, and they didn't know it was going to be called the Federal Reserve, but he does put reserve right here on its head, so they had some inclination of what it was going to be called, but he's calling it the National Reserve Association. And so if you look up here, so here's the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Capitol, the White House, and then down here is a factory, a farm, and a bank. And the Federal Reserve octopus is squeezing all the money out of them and funneling it into the New York Stock Exchange, and right here it says Wall Street. So I'm going to read from John. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So basically this whole system was a lie, conceived by the devil. So in Mark 19 it says, "And the cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lusts of other things entering in, choke the world, and it becometh unfruitful." So basically what this is saying is, this is a warning from the Bible that we need to stay away from this stuff and the deceitfulness of riches. So here's what it can cause. The Federal Reserve admits it creates money out of nothing, and causing hyperinflation, which is a loss of purchasing power. And I put it's a scam of Satan. See, this is what we could have, the world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way, but the Federal Reserve creates this, where people are poor and stand in breadlines because their money lost all of its purchasing power. So I'm going to show you a clip now from Mike Maloney, the biggest scam in the history of mankind, Hidden Secrets of Money.
Interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce, because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the bank.
All right, and then I'm going to go back to Ron Paul. He has a clip that shows him telling Congress what the dangers of what they're doing.
Congressman Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The best way I could describe the problems that we face here in this country, as well as the problem that the Federal Reserve faces, is that we're indeed between the rock and the hard place, because we have a serious problem. We don't talk about much how we got here. We talk about how we're going to patch it up. The bubble has been burst. We saw what happened after the NASDAQ bubble burst. We don't ask how it was created, and then we have a housing bubble, and it's deflating and it's spreading. And yet nobody says, where does it come from? And what is the advice that you generally get? And that is, inflate the currency. They don't say inflate the currency. They don't say debase the currency. They don't say devalue the currency. They don't say cheat the people who are saved. They say lower the interest rates. But they never ask you, and I don't hear you say too often, the only way I can lower interest rates is I have to create more money. I have to lower the discount rate. I have to make it generous. I have to increase reserves. I have to lower the interest rates and fix the interest rates, overnight rates. And the only way you can do this is by increasing the money supply. And I see this as the problem that we don't want to talk about. Currently, of course, we can't follow the money supply with M3, but we can follow one of your statistics, which is the MZM, the ready cash available, and we see that inflation is alive and well. It's
All right, so that was Mike Maloney and Ron Paul. And so here's another example. This is an example of a different central bank from Germany. This is called the Reichsbank. That was their central bank. So the Reich Bank was a privately owned central bank in Germany from 1876 until 1945. So they had Germany had a central bank installed in 1876, so long before America's central bank was established in 1913. And I took this bottom part here from the blog.dun.gr's website because it was a really good explanation of what happened in Germany, and I stuck Reichsbank in for where they said government was printing money, because it was really the central bank that was working with the government. That's the only change I made. So it says, in 1919, inflation became rampant in Germany as the Weimar Republic began to print paper bills like crazy. In 1918, around the end of World War I, 1 German mark could buy a loaf of bread. By 1922, 163 marks could buy a loaf of bread. As the Reichsbank printed more and more bills, the value of money fell, as the price of goods and services skyrocketed. When a small denomination of bills became worthless, the Reichsbank began to print bills of larger denominations. Ultimately, the Republic's attempts to print money to pay its debts was fruitless. When nations pay foreign debts, they have to pay in the currency of the creditor nation. So to pay off France, the German government had to exchange its marks for francs. However, the more money that was printed, the value of the mark fell, and the value of the franc rose. In desperation, the Weimar Republic continued to print more. So here we have, I don't speak German, but pretty sure this says billion, so Zen billion mark. And that's how bad it had gotten that they were printing billion-dollar bills. And then so this is from the Great Depression in America. It says, jobless men, keep going. We can't take care of our own. So I'm going to read here from Galatians. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. So that's basically just saying these central bankers, they want money and they want to corrupt the money system. And when you corrupt the money system, you corrupt society, and your society falls apart. So in closing, I just want to say, let's heed to God's word so we don't end up back in Hoovervilles. This is a picture of the Hoovervilles from back in the day when the stock market collapsed and everyone was poor. People used to live in houses, but as you can see, they're living in these little shacks in the dirt. And yeah, so that's the evil of the Federal Reserve Bank.